plants you put in a cage like that?
I put two. You can put just one, but I always put two just in case a cutworm gets one or whatever. And that tomato cage is big enough that I don't really think they crowd each other. I'm disappointed with a cage full of tomatoes like that if I don't pick at least 50 pounds of tomatoes out of that. That's the kind of results you'll have, isn't it? You weighed your tomatoes, didn't you?
Yeah, one picking and one tomato and one. Are you going to talk about cornmeal?
Yeah.
Now, is that cornmeal you get in the store or not?
Doesn't matter. We'll talk about just a couple of other problems you could have with tomatoes. But you get a lot of pounds off a good tomato plant. Yes, ma'am.
You said you put 2 tomatoes in one cage, but when I generally put 1 in, but it's so completely compacted with 1. How in the world did 2?
It's more compacted with
Yeah.
2.
They survive.
They survive. They don't seem to have any detrimental effects. Okay, one other thing. Tomato plants, one more common disease that you may see on them is something called early blight. And that's where they kind of start wilting, or don't wilt, but they turn yellow from the bottom and it just seems to spread up. A problem that occurs in the soil, and it seems to hit some varieties more than others. Cornmeal, whole ground cornmeal, is a wonderful material, and all that is ground up corn. And you say, what else is cornmeal? Well, the cornmeal you buy at the grocery store, the quote, enriched cornmeal, they have taken and polished the outer edges off of the corn. They've basically taken all the nutrient away and left you with nothing but the starch inside. They've taken away 14 essential nutrients, they put 10 of them back, and they called it enriched. I think that's what George Bush called fuzzy math. I still come out corn nutrients short. Anyway, what you want is whole ground cornmeal, and it has a very special property in that there is a beneficial fungus. We were talking about beneficial fungi earlier. There's a beneficial fungus called trichoderma, which grows on the cornmeal. And trichoderma wipes out a lot of damaging fungi. I mean, if you've got athlete's foot or toenail fungus, put it in your socks. You'll never have athlete's foot again. You can moisten it and soak your feet in it. You won't have toenail fungus. That's a whole other story. But we use it to control fungus problems on plants. And usually when I'm planting tomatoes, I'll just throw a handful of whole ground cornmeal on the ground around them. If I see any sign of early blight, or even if we don't, I'll usually spray. This is a natural material called plant wash. It really seems to do a good job of stopping early blight before it starts. The other thing you can do that helps if you don't want to buy that, you can take your whole ground cornmeal, soak it in water for 24 hours, and then use that spray. Spray the foliage. You'll be amazed at how many disease problems that will prevent. Now I'm talking about tomatoes here, but that's also the same way you stop powdery mildew on beans and on squash and things like that, or just about any kind of fungus disease. You can stop with cornmeal or cornmeal tea or the plant wash. Yes.
And you do the Epsom salts at the same time you do the cornmeal.
I do the Epsom salts whenever I get around to it. I make sure it's down when I plant. But sometimes, some years, I'll put it down when I make my mounds of fertilizer and compost.
I just want to do everything one time.
Well, just put it down, and put it down when you do your fertilizer and
Okay.
compost. Yes, sir.
The cornmeal, is that only beneficial on the surface of the soil, or?
It's most beneficial on the surface. It will help even worked into the soil. Friend Don Pylant, when Don was down at the San Antonio Botanical Gardens, he had an area that he just couldn't grow petunias because they rotted every year. He worked cornmeal into the soil and he never had rot again.
But the most benefit is on the surface.
I think the greatest advantage is on the surface. No problem at all. I know that people are busy and you have places sometimes you got kids waiting for you or whatever. You're not going to bother me if you have to get up late. What I'm going to do is talk about a bunch of different crops, and then I will stay and answer questions as long as anybody likes. But again, if you got to go, you got to go. That's most everything about tomatoes. Any other questions about tomatoes before we move on to another crop? Yes, sir.
Could you talk a little bit about growing tomatoes in containers?
It's exactly the same way you grow them in the ground. You need to use big containers, growing whiskey barrel size. If you want to do a novelty, you can do these, what do they call them, topsy-turvy pots where you hang them upside down and you get 2 tomatoes off of each one. Those tomatoes are going to cost you $20 a piece. Yeah, your neighbor does that. If you are super limited on space, there are truly miniature tomato plants out there. There's one called Red Robin, there's another one called Tiny Tim that only grows about this tall. They make fruit about as big as jelly beans. And if that's a tomato to you, that's fine, but I'm from Texas. I like it big.
Do you still recommend, Bob, putting a handful of fireplace ashes down in the hole along with the rock phosphate?
I'll put a little bit, probably wouldn't put a full handful. I think that's more important on some crops other than tomatoes.
Tomatoes?
Yeah, but it certainly won't hurt anything if you use a limited amount. High in potassium, and that makes things sweeter. Okay, what do we talk about? You want to talk about? Yes, sir.
I'd be happy to come to a seminar on how to pick tomatoes.
Help with my garden, right? That works. Yes.
Good tomatoes last year, should we use the Epsom salt and the rock phosphate as a preventive?
Every year.
Yep.
Every year. I mean, Epsom salts are cheap. Rock phosphate, you've lost all benefit because it's dissolved and gone out in the soil. Rock phosphate helps with root growth and helps with fruit set.
Well, it jumps right up when you put that in the hole. the
Yeah,
first
it
10
does.
days.
It does. They do grow quickly. But yeah, those are two things in the fertilizer I'd use every year. The compost you use less and less every year as your soil gets better and better. Yes, ma'am.
I watched on TV when they planted the hole really, or the plant really deep, they take all the leaves off. No, you don't have to do that?
You don't have to do that. I just stick them down in the ground, pile the soil on. When you plant as many as I do, you do it quickly. Okay, you want to talk about peppers? Everybody like peppers?
Yeah.
Okay, just 2 or 3 things about peppers. Not every pepper grows here. So don't think that you can get a seed catalog and pick any pepper you like out of it and it's going to grow here. Peppers are actually divided, I think, into 7 different categories. Some peppers are higher altitude, cooler weather plants. New Mexico chilies are going to do lousy here. But there are lots of peppers that we grow well. Most of the more flavorful peppers, translated hotter peppers, grow extremely well here. Many of your bigger fruited tomatoes will grow well in spring and fall, and we're always looking for varieties that really continue to grow through the summer. You can grow your beautiful red bells and yellow bells and orange bells, but you're not going to be as big as you see in the grocery store that came from California perfect weather, but you'll get especially nice ones spring and fall. Tomatoes are warmer weather plants, though. Don't put them out when you plant your tomatoes. I'm sorry, peppers are warmer weather plants. Don't put them out when you plant your tomatoes. Wait 2, 3, 4 weeks after you plant your tomatoes. Tomatoes will take temperatures, 35 degrees isn't a real problem to a tomato plant. It is to a pepper plant. I would like the night temperatures to be 50 or above when I plant peppers. Peppers, I find you get more production if you stake them up a little bit. My jalapenos especially will get so heavy the plants sometimes break, or we get a wind, they fall over in the wind. I'll tell you what I frequently use for growing. No, I'm not going to do that. For growing peppers and eggplants, I'll take this little extension that was on the top of this tomato cage, and I'll use that for support for my peppers and my eggplant. It works really well. I have in the past have also just put a stake in and tied them up. By the way, if you're going to tie anything up, there's a new material that's a Velcro material. You just cut it and push it together. There's none of this trying to tie bows and break up your plant at the same time. But peppers will grow better if they are staked. Peppers, like tomatoes, are susceptible to these big old tomato hornworms or tobacco hornworms. Either one can eat up a great deal. BT, this is the solution for just about any kind of caterpillar problem. It's totally harmless to you, but it's a bacteria that kills all kinds of caterpillars. Okay, I was going to talk about this in a minute, but since people probably have to come and go, I do want to talk about spider mites. Spider mites may be a problem on tomatoes, may be a problem on peppers, they will be a problem on beans. Some plants are just more susceptible than others to spider mites. The way that you stop spider mites is by spraying with liquid seaweed. You spray your plants every couple of weeks with liquid seaweed, you will never see a spider mite. Even marigolds, even things that are really known for spider mites. Spray that liquid seaweed and they simply will not be a problem. We make a product, or we have made for us a product, where we actually mix a little bit of the seaweed and a little bit of the molasses together. The ideal ratio is 2 to 1. If you want to make your own, take a gallon of water, add 2 tablespoons of seaweed, 1 tablespoon of molasses, or you can get a pre-mix like this. But if you spray your plants periodically with this, you'll have fewer caterpillar problems. You will not have problems with spider mites, but you will also have fewer problems with caterpillars. And here's the reason why. This material that kills caterpillars is a bacteria, Bacillus thuringiensis. That's why we call it BT. But all bacteria, we told you, are really stimulated by molasses. When you, by the way, if you're going to use this, put a little bit of molasses in with it. A tablespoon in your sprayer or so when you mix it up, it'll be about 20 times as effective. My experience has been that when I'm spraying the plants with the seaweed molasses, I seem to get enough naturally occurring BT. This has happened one year that I went out and I found 2 or 3 big hornworms that, and if you know what you're looking for, it's pretty